Insurance isn't our only passion at UFG Insurance. We're dedicated to supporting the communities where we live and work. We proudly offer our employees paid time off to volunteer. Their work is making a positive difference across the U.S. UFG's Go Beyond Award is presented to one employee annually for exceptional community service. Striving to deliver on our promises is more than what we do. It's who we are. For a company promising community support, think UFG.
Alrighty, hello and welcome to this session of our 2023 Iowa Ideas Conference. My name is Marissa Payne and I'll be your moderator, and we're talking about taking public projects from idea to reality. So this session will identify steps needed to bring projects from conception to action, and in some cases failure. Once you have an idea, what's next? How do you bring people with you and build your project partners or champions? And how can government agencies work with private entities? And what has to ultimately happen to find success. So thank you all for attending today, and thank you to our sponsors, ITC Midwest and UFG Insurance. And thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I will turn it over to each of you to introduce yourselves, starting with Nancy.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Nancy Bird. I'm the president of Greater Iowa City, Inc. We're generally speaking, we're a new economic development business support agency that has recently merged the Iowa City Area Development Group and the Iowa City Area Business Partnership, the former chamber, together. So this is a real year of growth for us. I came to this job after 10 years at the Iowa City Downtown District. And prior to that, my family moved here from Seattle to take on that Downtown District job. And it's been great being back, and I look forward to the panel, and so it's a great topic for today. So thank you for having me.
Josh?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josh Shamber, and I'm the president of Think Iowa City and the Iowa City Area Sports Commission. In my day job, in my regular job, I'm Nancy Bird's fan club president. I'm a big fan of Nancy. But I've been here for dating myself almost 23 years now, leading the Convention Visitors Bureau efforts for Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty. And prior to that, I was in Cedar Rapids at the Convention and Visitors Bureau up there in the late 90s. So appreciate the opportunity to visit with you once again, Marissa.
Thank you. Jody. There we go.
I have been with the community development director for going on 4 years now, and before that I worked in Reno, Nevada, primarily working in community development and with primarily a focus on housing, but I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to bring it all together and kind of make big things happen in a smaller community. So that's where we're at.
I'm not sure if there's an audio issue just for me or everyone else, but just in case, Jody's with the city of Muscatine. All right, we will get into it. So, to just start things off, say someone within the community has an idea, whether it's for a public art project or a massive new development. What's the first step? How do you kind of build other community champions or champion a project yourself? Whoever wants to start off.
Well, I can take a swing at it. I was thinking about this, like from the step 1, 2, 3, 4. I think, just in my past career, one of the most important lessons or things that I think I've seen over the course of time is that there really does need to be a clear champion of any project. So if it's a group of people that's got a good idea, but one person, or maybe it's a pair, but really a strong champion isn't pushing it forward. That's really, really important to have someone who's willing to go out and speak about it, talk about it, kind of pull the partners together. And it doesn't have to be someone from your city. It can be really anybody, so long as they're really committed to the cause. I'd say that's one of the key pieces of any kind of successful project in the end, because these projects, if you're working with both public and private entities, they do take time, they do take effort. And if you don't have someone really making sure that it's humming along and it continues, then oftentimes the projects don't happen. And I've seen a lot of volunteers start those processes, realize that it's difficult, and drop them. And either it wasn't the right time, or it wasn't, they didn't have the tools that they needed to. But I think all of those things can come together if it's a good idea, if there's a real need for it in the community. But a clear champion is really, really important. So I think I just throw that out to my colleagues to see if they have any other thoughts around that. But it's pretty important.
I would echo everything Nancy just said. I think one of the ways, a good idea can be vetted, or what that first step looks like, is really to connect yourself with organizations like ours, or Nancy's, or those that, depending on what the nature of the idea, that are charged with leading economic and community development efforts for your geographic footprint. Whether it's Jack or Jane Doe that happens to come up and want to give us a call and say, hey, I'm thinking about an adaptation film festival. I'm just interested in film. And how does something like that get started? Well, we're more than happy to kind of vet those ideas with them. And whether it be a new festival, an event, attraction, or it's a development of some kind, that's something that our organization will know exactly who to hand that off to dig a little bit deeper. And Nancy would be one I would turn to, just because of the relationship and the history of ICAD and the work that they do, and larger workforce development issues and things like that. So, don't be afraid to reach out. That's kind of what we're charged with doing in economic and community development. And there really isn't a bad idea. Even if there's ideas that don't materialize, it's great just to develop the relationship, because there's other things that come into play, and we appreciate those connections.
I would say I agree that when you have a specific project, you do have to have a champion, somebody that kind of makes sure all the steps are getting taken and is the point of contact, because things do happen and people do need to be reached out. So it might be somebody needs to be called. There's a last minute glitch, or there needs to be a change, and somebody that will spearhead that. On the other hand, I think there are times when there are broader activities. Like for us, we're huge working on the housing thing right now. And we do that. When we really started to see movement on the housing issue for us was when a group of us came together, and it was a really cross-sector group. So we have the county board of supervisors represented, the city, nonprofits, developers, landlords, and the chamber all sit on what we now call the housing council. But it was when we got all 5 of those kind of groups together to push the issue, and then giving the same message that it might, like when the nonprofit talks about it, they might be talking about the affordable end of housing and how it impacts people in the community. But we also have employers that are talking about how the economics, their economics are driven, and the community economics are driven by their inability to find employees because we don't have adequate housing. And so that we're all saying that same message on that end, but it goes back to saying giving the same message and telling the same story, and continuing to promote the education piece of that on an ongoing basis. Nobody gets to step out. So it's not like, oh, we've created the housing plan and now Cantu, as a member of the housing council, can just sit back. They're involved in the day-to-day conversations. And each year when we do our housing summit, that's our educational component of that plan too.
I also want to just put a plug out there for our attendees. Throughout this session, feel free to submit any questions you have for the panelists through the Whova chat function, and I'll be sure to incorporate those into our conversation. But yeah, to the point of, how important community champions are, how do you even go about kind of cultivating, that spirit of idea sharing and just, pursuing ambitious projects within a community? How do you kind of, bolster those potential champions and even get people to see that, their ideas have merit and, can be used to do good in a community?
Well, I think, I'll start there. I guess it's harder than ever, to be quite honest. I've mentioned this a few times. Nancy and I sat on quite a few panels, so she's probably heard me say this, but more and more, it's just super challenging in today's world when everybody's news cycle is is based on the algorithm of the information that they like or that they're served. It's really hard to kind of get the word out, get message out, have really good discussion about a subject matter, or a topic, or a development through Twitter, Facebook, and all of these other sources. And so we are fortunate that we do have a locally owned paper. I know the Gazette's a big sponsor bringing this together, but not every community has that. And so I think, when you're looking at these opportunities and initiatives, it starts with getting a good base of community support and identifying who's going to be impacted by these efforts, positively or negatively, and trying to really put in good work to vet these ideas and concepts. And then who needs to be part of the team? How are you going to build this base of support to kind of get it done? And I think in everything that we've ever been associated with, I think one of the things that comes to mind very quickly to me, and I know Nancy was involved in this as well, was the school bond that we passed several years ago. That failed until we really got together with the entirety of the community and put a plan in that truly showed broad impact to every part of the community. And that sort of thought process and work to be very inclusive brought about the passage of the largest school bond in history. And we're seeing the results of that certainly here in Johnson County. We have over the last several years. So, I would definitely start there with, the inclusivity and trying to paper and pen out, the audiences that this is going to impact.
I would, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to mention that the paper and pen component, when someone has taken the time to write up the introduction, what the proposal is, put a strategy together, and potential costs, without something really written down or given thought to, so that it can be pushed around more broadly. I don't think it really, any project rises to the point of credibility without that. So even at the very early stages, if you really want to advance something, really taking some time, that champion or champions, to sit down and put it to pen and paper and really be thoughtful about what you're communicating is really critical on any project. And the Go Bond was a huge one, because there was a lot of strategy development about how the community was going to make sure that there was sort of a win in it for all the different areas of the community that potentially may not have been for it. And it was quite successful in that for the strategy piece. But even a couple page proposal on a smaller project really makes a big difference.
I would agree that telling this story in writing is shows you put a little more thought into it than, oh, I want to do X, whatever that happens to be, right? And it's the start of that marketing and telling the story piece. And it also helps from the government side of things, I would say, helps us identify where we're falling short and needing to provide assistance for helping those projects or those activities come to fruition. So recently, we were having a conversation about special events in town. Like, we all want more special events, and how do we promote that? But if you haven't been through it, and as we get more, then it becomes a management issue on the staff side. But then how do we help people understand this is the process you go through to make sure we're ready and that we're providing the support that you need to be successful? Because we are the government, and it can't just happen tomorrow, right? Like, there are certain things that have to be approved by council if it's shutting down a road or whatever. So how do we help the people who are interested in that understand that process and put it in a place they can find it, they can come in, they know who to call to ask the question, and making sure they never feel like, oh, we don't have time for that, or we need to take the next step. Like, you can't do it because we just don't have time now. So.
Yeah, since you touched a little on just kind of the process of getting the thoughts together in the initial proposal, I mean, in such an information saturated environment that we have, kind of as Josh mentioned, how can communities effectively communicate about a project and build a shared vision among residents, businesses, and local government?
Well, as I mentioned, it's the hardest thing we try to do, or we've forced to do, and need to do, is getting the word out and vetting these sort of things and building community with the state of really journalism today and news today. And so, I think a lot of it starts with just having your own individual network and your credibility and your partnerships, and leaning on those partnerships. And it's kind of been said a lot, and it's probably a little too token right now, but collaboration is the key to currency. And I've heard that many times, and we've kind of lived and breathed that. And I think that's directly attributed to the growth that we've kind of seen in our area, and some of the bigger successes we've had is building that network and those relationships, big and small. And then when we are looking at an opportunity, leaning on those and having quick phone calls. I mean, people a phone call away to really spend some time, and that'll take your meeting, and because of a lot of other initiatives you might be in development. So building that base and that network, I think is the biggest opportunity and strategy moving forward.
For people that are in community leadership positions, I think it's really smart to always take the meeting, because you never know what'll cross your desk, and maybe the timing is right. So it's really great when you are working with people who really understand collaboration. If you're on the project side, the one thing I would mention that I think can be discouraging sometimes, but how important timing is. In my past job, I know there was a number of different projects that our group was really interested in pushing forward, and the timing was not. We weren't there yet. We hadn't raised enough awareness. We hadn't expressed enough importance over the need, or people couldn't quite see the vision. Like we could see the vision, but they couldn't. So the timing sometimes you have to be patient and just recognize that. Let's say something doesn't work in this 1 year, but you're still really interested in it. There might be a time down the road, a couple years down the road, where the timing for that project, is perfect. So I would just say that, when things don't move ahead perfectly as you think they might, it doesn't mean that it'll never happen. It just means either the political climate, or maybe even with working with the cities. Cities have a strategic plan. They have certain focus areas in different years. And when you can line up with their focus, that's really, really important in my mind, because it'll help the public sector embrace your project if it's lined up. If it's not lined up in their strategic plan, or what they're working on in the next couple of years, or what's important to them, it's much harder for a public sector entity to grab that project or put resources towards it, because it's not what they've committed to the public that they're going to do. So I think, how you engage, and, the timing of certain things, and you can't express enough how important it is to have patience, because sometimes things come full circle, and your project can hit.
Just blend those two things, right? Is like, always have the conversation, always call and ask, because you never know what's being worked on behind the scenes, or what's being thought of, or what might be possible. And you might hit it at the right time, right? Like, oh, maybe we're starting our CIP process, and we can really put that trail, or maybe there is an improvement that needs to happen in a venue space that would make it so much more that we are not necessarily the experts on. I mean, let's be honest, government staff members are probably not the experts on throwing events. We might be able to put a project together, like the logistical steps of doing that, but we're not the experts on some of the stuff that's needed to make more experiential things happen.
I'd like to elaborate on something that Nancy said about, like maybe we can see the vision, but not everyone can. I mean, when you find yourself like running into that, how do you kind of recalibrate from there? Are there maybe like projects that you just kind of set aside and figure maybe it's not the right time, or, is it a matter of just communicating differently with different stakeholders, or how do you kind of navigate when that happens?
Well, I know that illustrating the vision can be helpful. Making sure that you can really express what it could look like, make it more tangible for people to understand it. I can think of, for some of the downtown alleyways, people, the community has to really kind of believe that they can be improved. And sometimes when you talk about, well, what would that look like? And you can illustrate it and help them along to see like this actually could happen. And demonstrate the steps to it. I mean, I do think it's not all about a pretty picture. People have to like be able to conceive that it can happen. So the more partners you bring into it and recognize, kind of the steps along the way, I think it's helpful. But even that, if it requires maybe the larger public to think differently about it, it can take some time. You have to talk it through and do the outreach needed to make sure that people kind of understand how these things work and how they can come together.
Did either of you have follow-ups on that, or
I don't think so. I don't. I think that was well put, Nancy.
okay? Yeah, so what is the role that you guys have all seen in terms of community partnerships and jumpstarting any work, and how can different stakeholders decide kind of who or what entity is best suited to take on different aspects of a project?
Well, I think, the projects that have had the most success in our community, I think have been rooted in kind of the core makeup of our community, if that makes any sense. I mean, what is, the areas that I've been involved in are a little more unique than some, in that, we're known all over the world for writing. We're the third UNESCO city of literature in the world, first in the United States. And so everybody recognizes, that we're in many ways the birthplace of creative writing in the United States. And so we're also known all over the world for wrestling. We have the Ukrainian women's team in town this week, the Canadian women's team in town this week for 10 days training. People all over the world know us in writing and wrestling. So from where I sit, those are very easy things to leverage when you're talking about initiatives or opportunities. And so it's easy for people to understand. It's low-hanging fruit, so to speak. There are other things that are not low-hanging fruit. Nancy has referenced the downtown district. I've been around long enough to know how many times we failed in trying to create a downtown district and a SMID, a self-supported municipal improvement district, until we finally kind of got it right. And we kind of got it right because we had two champions who did a lot of the things that we've already mentioned here today, and that is paper to pen, building a vision that people can understand and kind of see some potential in, and then ultimately buy into. And we had a couple folks that really took the lead, and that's ultimately how we were fortunate enough to bring Nancy back to the state of Iowa from the state of Washington. So I would look, if I'm a community out there looking for how you can for a project that may take root, to have it be truly rooted in the sort of the core competencies of your community, attributes of your community, I should say.
One thing is to learn from the things that aren't successful, right? So a few years ago, there was some collaboration in some kind of anchor institutions, the city, the chamber, the utility company, that pursued a rebranding of like creating a new logo that would be used across sectors for the city of Muscatine. And it, for lack of a better words, it went over like a lead balloon. When it was released, there was a huge outcry, and then it was like, okay, what do we do? But you can't kind of let that make you stop looking at what the purpose of it was. So it wasn't a logo that they needed, but it really kind of reinforced identifying what do people, what does the community relate to, what resonates as what are we about? Because out of that, it came back to, no, Muscatine is about the pearls, Muscatine is about the watermelon, so on and so forth. So even though we haven't done a new logo, everybody just kind of went and stayed with their own. there have been some new projects lately that were more successful because they did promote those aspects that people in their pushing down on the original initiative actually reinforce this is what we do value and what we do care about, and this is how we see our identity. Because you can't really you have to be careful to, and I think it's probably a little different. Like Iowa City has a lot of changing people, right? Like with the student population, you have a lot of different voices at a lot of different times. For Muscatine, we're pretty us. Like it's a pretty, the population is pretty steady. And we have people moving in and moving out, but not in huge numbers. So over time, those families, and this is really what they believe their community is. And so listening to that, and how do you build on those aspects of it to make it better. And so like that resulted in probably one of the fastest government involved public art projects recently. When RAGBRAI was coming to town, the mayor's like, we should have the world's largest watermelon as public art, with the idea that it would be done before RAGBRAI came through. That didn't quite happen, but we still, within 3 months, we have the world's largest watermelon sculpture on our riverfront, and none of it was paid for with government dollars, right? So even though that was a success, like, because that was something that the community identified with, so you got businesses that would step up and be involved in making that a reality, because it resonated with what they saw as part of the community and the people that they were serving. But then on the flip side, you have to still fight kind of the battle that, because everybody didn't pay attention, right? It's like, how do you reach them, even to let them have the information, let alone be involved in the process? They don't, they're like, well, how much tax money went into that? Not a dollar. So learning that it's never an ending educational piece, right? And every project is an educational component to the next, whether it's, this is how you can make something happen, to this is how the process works to get something to happen. Or, you know, you're always trying to use that, whether they're for it or against it, you still have to use that information to help people understand what is going on in addition to this current thing.
Yeah, so we have an audience question that I'll throw in here for the group. The concept of public-private partnerships has recently become popular. In this model, how can a community ensure these projects are equitable and benefit underserved neighborhoods and people who do not have capacity to be a private partner?
I think everybody has the capacity to be a private partner. You might not be putting money into something, but you have an opinion. And you can take some, you know, and you can give time to a partnership that you believe in. It doesn't have to be, it might not be a development, right? It might be something more quality of life oriented. So we have a what we call our Ignite Vitality Mulberry neighborhood district. It's a neighborhood revitalization, but people have some issues with the revitalization word. So, but it takes a lot of people, and not, so it's, again, it's the government entities, it's nonprofits, it's private citizens, it's the utility, everybody putting in their, providing input into what does it look like to build this community up, because we're not saying it's a bad community, right? It's just suffered from disinvestment. And what would make it better, and how do we encourage that? And it might be knowing that, oh, I read that somebody else got money for here, and we funded a community grant writer. We could potentially grant write to a different thing for something specific, or it could be like, these are the types of services, or these are the types of activities that the residents would benefit from, as opposed to actually providing money for it, right? Sometimes the money is easier to get because you just have that community buy-in. So everybody can be involved in a public-private partnership. I think that's one of the beauties of those types of partnerships, because it's from input to funding and everything in between.
And I would say in our area, quite honestly, for that question, I think it's a good one, but I don't know that we've done anything but public-private partnerships. I'm trying to think of what, I mean, we're such a unique community. You can count on one hand the number of large-scale private sector, even employers in Johnson County. It's all public sector based. And so, you know, the growth and the development and the vision has had to be public and private through some sort of partnership, and in some cases, public. You know, that may be the Iowa River Landing in Coralville to everything that Coralville's kind of done, to, you know, recently, and Nancy could probably speak more to this, you know, the South District SMID and following in the steps of the Iowa City Downtown District. Certainly that's a private sector based initiative to create that, but it's definitely being leveraged, and there's a strong partnership there with the public sector to get that going in the right direction and create, you know, a very strong, diverse district in the south part of Iowa City. So I don't know of, you know, I'm sure there's it may be unique to some communities, but it certainly hasn't been in the 20 plus years that I've been down here in Coralville.
The entities that, if it's public-private, I would say, you know, the cities have a role in supporting the entire public, and they should have values that roll up underneath that for DEI and A, and to make sure that they're inclusive. And private sector partners, I mean, I know our organization, Josh's, others in our area, we have those values built in. So I don't know that all private entities have or done, but I think the more collaborative you are, you learn the benefit of how important that is to be inclusive. So I think, you know, establishing your values in the project would be important.
Yeah, would you be able to maybe go into the South District, Schmidt, just a little more?
I can share a little bit about it. It is a private sector driven type of project. If people are familiar with self-supported municipal improvement districts, basically it's where property owners get together and decide to tax themselves through a special district, collect that money through the city, and then use those funds to improve in that specific geography every year. So there was a new SMID started up in the southeast, in the South District of Iowa City. It had a real champion with Angie Jordan. She really drove it. She was a neighborhood advocate for a long time. And then she learned over the course of time with support from both Josh and I and others in the city, how basically you start up a SMID, what that looks like. So she worked with to engage property owners, and a number of us worked with her so that they could sign a petition and create a boundary for where that tax would start and stop. And so in doing so, she really had to, you know, have a vision, share why it was important. She put it to paper. We developed a slide deck and really shopped that slide deck around the community for a long time. We spent 6 months sharing with different influencers and city council members and private entities how important a district like this could be for the south side of town, and then, you know, help develop the petition. So it was a big effort, but a lot of the time that was spent was really in some of the technical aspects of informing and educating the general public in the South District neighborhood of why this tool could really promote and help enhance the neighborhood over the course of time. And they were able to pass it in the first run. So SMIDs take a little while to get off the ground, but it took 9 months essentially to make the case and get the petition moving forward. And it's been going gangbusters ever since. Great, it was a great example, as was the downtown district. I mean, I know that Josh had mentioned that it took 3 times for it to pass, but with each time, you know, we were talking about timing, sometimes they fail, but if you're really committed to it, you look back, see what didn't work, where the project didn't sit right, you make corrections, and you continue to push when you have energy and momentum behind it again. And it took that to get the downtown district SMID moving forward. And it really does take those champions to stay on it. And I think our community has certainly benefited through these tools.
I think that's a good segue into another question I had, which was, in projects that you've been involved with, have there been times where plans have changed, or have any projects just kind of outright failed? And I mean, what are ways that you've gone from that and pivoted from an original vision and have been able to reset after a setback?
Well, I have one that's not very sexy, but it's one that I learned a lot from over the course of the 10 years I was with the downtown district. When I first started, my parking place was behind our building that we were in, and to access it, you had to go through this very narrow alley into the back alley in downtown Iowa City of a very unique historic block of buildings. And that very narrow alley, I learned over the course of time that buildings had been built over the other exits of the alley. So there's only one way in and one way out. And it was really a terrible alley. I mean, it was unpaved and had been unpaved through, the centuries that we've been here. No one had ever really fully developed that back alley. And so when I moved in and saw this, I'm like, this is atrocious. I can't believe it's like this. And they're like, oh yeah, it'll never change. There's 25 different owners of the alley. It was all private. There's no public incentive to get involved in it. And I kind of had it in my list of things that I would love to see happen, is just to get it repaved and drained so that the infrastructure was there for the back, for those buildings, because it started to erode the base of the historic buildings, all the water that wasn't draining. So over snow and expansion of ice over the course of time. So it was a really big challenge. It took a decade, but it was kind of the last thing that happened as I was exiting out of the door of the downtown district and into this new job, is to get those 25 owners to understand how important it was to all pay in for one to repave or pave at all and drain the back alley, and to get all the cars out of there, pave it, and put them all back. So you had to work with all the businesses. I think all told, that block, there was probably at least 50 stakeholders that had some sort of pay, and they had to pay to get this one project done. And it took legal structure, it took some great lawyers, providing their time to get that all done. And it doesn't look like much, but I will say it failed on 2 separate accounts. We had thought we had it going, and then we went back to, oh, it'll never happen. And so we started in 2012, it failed in 2016, it failed in 2019, and then it took till 2023 to get that thing paved. But now it's preserved the buildings for many, many years to come, and it drains, and it should be in pretty good shape for a long time. I think the things I learned was, we didn't have the algorithm right for what the pay-in was, and we didn't have a champion on the property owner side to help. And what did make it happen at the end was that our organization wasn't pushing it forward. It was actually a property owner that said, my building is in real jeopardy, so I'm going to step in. And she did. And she bulldogged it through. I mean, she just pushed it through. So it was really great. I'm sure everybody's got a failed story, right? I mean,
I have a million failed stories. I mean, I've been run over by a truck many times on projects, and a lot of them, there's many different reasons as to why. We're obviously in a big university town. University is a major stakeholder here, and sometimes when you're doing big initiatives and partnering with university, some projects can fail just because you didn't, for whatever reason, check the box and check in with one leader of one of the silos over there. And they want to kill the project because they don't think they were involved from the beginning. So it's little things like that to bigger initiatives. I would say in some of the projects that may have failed, they failed as of today or this moment in time, but not totally failed in the future. One of the ideas that people talk a lot about here in our area and in Cedar Rapids is the Crandic Railroad. And it's so many times it's been studied to death. Would it be great since we have a railroad that sits between our communities that you wouldn't put in any other place, at least from the airport south, than where it sits today, its owned locally, wouldn't it be an incredible public transit option to get people for the environment, for parking, and rather than putting up another $15 million parking ramp? Can we figure it out? We're very centrally employment based down here. All the things go, yep, love it, love it, love it. You get into running the numbers, figuring that part out, and then it kind of dies. And unfortunately, I mean, this goes back decades when Ron Corbett was mayor of Cedar Rapids, and there was a vice president of Kirkwood, and I co-headed a study. And so anyhow, I just think it dies because the public and the community hasn't demanded that their elected officials do it. And it's a priority. People still like their cars. And their freedom with their cars. But so that's failed many times as we've looked at that. And then, but it may not fail in the future. It may become more and more of a necessity. And I'm glad that the railroad continues to sit there and the right of way is preserved, thankfully, because it is, again, owned locally. So, it just comes with the nature of projects and development and reviews that sometimes things fail for ridiculous reasons, and other times, for reasons that they don't see it to be as big of a priority as some people might lead you to believe.
For us here in Muscatine, my biggest frustration, and it's not a failure because the project is still proceeding, it's just proceeding much slower than I had envisioned in the beginning. And part of my frustration is just because it's a community engagement process. And so we pursued Community Heart and Soul, and we were the largest community to do Community Heart and Soul at the time we applied for it and started the process. And it's all typically volunteer driven, and it's all asset based. So Community Heart and Soul is based on, tell us what you love about the community. Why do you stay here? What do you like about it? And now, how do we build on those things to make it the community you want it to be in 10 years, right? And so I thought, what better? Like, come tell us what you love. What I've learned is that people don't like to tell you what they love. They like to tell you what they don't like. And so you go out and you engage in community events on their own, and then you have community engagement events specifically about building your heart and soul statements. And I thought we were doing a really good job of, because we didn't even just try to rely on current staff or a volunteer to take it on. We actually hired an intern to then take it on and push it through, build it, work on how do you engage everybody, but getting people engaged other than for a one-word answer. So we got thousands and thousands of these little I Heart Muscatine because cards filled out, but they don't really tell you a lot if all you say is the river or the trails or the events. You don't really know what that means enough to make it take it into an action step. So the frustration is getting people to come and tell you more, like engage in a 5-minute conversation about, what do you mean you like the river? What do you mean about, and don't get me wrong, I'm all okay with bribing people. I went to events and I said, I'll buy the next person at this bingo process that comes and does an interview with me for 5 minutes. I got your drink, or I got you an appetizer, whatever. I'm okay with that. But it was still like so hard to get that positive input that we can then take to make action statements, that what we thought would be like a 9-month process is now over 2, and we're finally going to start on action statements. But it was really like, at the same time, then the good news is I built an infrastructure on how do you do surveys and stuff so the rest of the city can use it, which was frustrating because then we have 2-question survey about wayfinding signs, and in 2 weeks they got 700 responses to which sign design do you like best, right? Like, I want you to tell me what you really want, what's going to make a big difference for our community, and you want to tell me which sign you think is prettier. So that was a little frustrating, but not a failure. And again, it's not like Josh said, it might be a fail now. So a year ago, I would be like, we're failing at this. right? But now we're to the next spot at least. And so we're making progress, but it goes back to that, how do you engage everybody in the community to give you their input? And that was the point of Heart and Soul, is like, you want everybody's input, something that represents all of the is inclusive of all of the populations, not just the normal people who come out and tell you what they like or don't like. So that was one of our slow projects, but I think that the projects evolve. So if you go with a more tangible project, we had a public-private partnership to fund our first subdivision, and Iowa City will have no idea what this is like. Our first subdivision in more than a decade, we funded, and it wasn't, they weren't building the houses. They truly just created the subdivision for building the houses. And in the idea, I think that if you build it, they will come. Like, you get it ready, and then people will come build their houses, because they just need to have that ability to do it, and they need to have a space. And then it didn't. So then it took after 3 years, they only had like 10 houses built out of 62. And so it became this question about why, and then people grabbing onto the small details. And in the end, what it becomes is that people can't, what it appears to have become is that people can't see themselves building a house. Like, a lot of people don't have that stamina or wherewithal or financial freedom to go and say, oh, I want to build a house here and go make that happen. So that evolved. So the developers were disappointed with that, but it evolved, right? Then we got the housing council and the housing study going, and it came out that there's still a need. So we are doing some 3D printing in the area, as well as then we actually had an external developer come in and buy the rest of the lots, and is actually building the houses, which are selling as faster than he can build them. Obviously, like, they're actually going, even though they're smaller lots. Like, the conception of what was making it fail, you took somebody who had experience in making things happen and utilizing that appropriately. It is now working the way it was supposed to in the beginning. So
I think one of the things Jody said there, a minute ago is one of the things that I've had to learn, and I'm still bad at today at times, is that exercising patience to make the product better, because it's going to go, you have to go a little slower in order to build the engagement and get the inclusivity for the long run, it being that much greater chance of success, because people have buy-in and ownership. And personally, I've struggled with that over the years, because I can see the vision and I can see the payoff and I can see the potential. And I want to beat Des Moines or Cedar Rapids or Waterloo. I want to be the first one. Let's go get it. Let's get it done. And even though I have good friends and love all those cities, but sometimes when you slow down a little bit and you get that extra person at the table to really buy into it, and you exercise that patience, it truly does pay off tenfold in the long run. And I think that's one of the key things that I've had to learn over the years.
I think my sources here in Cedar Rapids prefer when you take it nice and slow.
I have grid friends up there. We're all but partners, believe it or not.
Yeah, to that point about pacing, though, from what you've seen in your work, is there an appropriate balance of projects that communities should strive for? Or how do you know what the right balance is for your community, either from a staff and volunteer capacity standpoint, making sure that people don't fizzle out so we can keep project momentum moving, or just from like a communication with residents, so people don't feel like, wait, there's a million things going on, I don't even know where to start with being engaged in all of it. What's the proper balance?
I think it's hard to say no, right? When you know it's the right thing and the opportunity comes. I think that's like one of the $1 million questions, is I'm not good at, like, so the Community Foundation, the county, and the city jointly funded this community grant writer. which is great. But at this point now, I'm like, I can't do another grant. I can't take on administration of another grant because they're writing the grants, but the grant administration still comes back to the entity that wanted the grant. And so, but at the same time, it's really hard to say no, like if you're having that success because you know it's the right thing for the community. And I don't know, again, this might be different because we've had such little new development and investment outside of our main industries to further that effort. It's really hard for me to say, oh no, we should not go after this grant when it seems like the right time. And especially because we did have, you know, the federal funds that came through COVID that gave us different opportunities and different ways to look at things. So that is not a good answer to your question because I don't think there's a good time. Like you have to find new people to take things on or be willing or build that capacity in somehow in the case when you're doing grants. It's different, right? When you have to fund it, you have some external constraints if you're looking at government financing or even the budget. I'm sure for the two organizations it is finite, right? So unless you have it external money coming in, you can kind of build that caseload a bit better. But for me, it's like go after it and then I'll sleep in 5 years, I guess. I don't know. So
Yeah, I think it's really tricky, the question you asked, Marissa, because there are good ideas that come up that you'd really like to test and give it a run, but sometimes the resources aren't available for one reason or another to really give it a proper run. A lot of that can do with you know, just the nature of our particular community. We're not heavily private sector based, as I mentioned earlier, and so you know, we have a lot of really good festivals, signature festivals and events that we're known for, and everybody's got a good idea for something new, but it can be tough for me and Nancy to help somebody go down that road when some of our other ones that are really signature have created a brand for themselves. You know, we continue to struggle with sustainability and resources from private sector or other revenue opportunities. And so there's definitely a balance there. But you know, when we're looking at something as an organization, we won't move forward or really make the investment until we've really come up with a plan to make it sustainable. You know, that's no guarantee that it'll continue into the future. We kind of look things our need date periods in our world for you know, visitation and activity and when the students are in town versus when they're not, things of that nature. But you know, if we've got a plan to how it can be sustainable for at least 3 to 5 years, we'll give it a run and we'll kind of seed it. But it's really tricky and it's a bit of an art. Some things you think are home runs and for whatever reason they just don't have it. Others really surprise you.
and I would say there's a difference for Josh is talking about like those special events, right? Like those things that are recurring over time. And for me, when I talk about the grants and stuff, we're talking more about physical place things. Like, so when I talk about the grants is there are a few of them that are more quality of life. So we got a grant the ACP grant, the Affordable Connectivity Grant, to help individuals be able to afford internet. You know, MPW got grants to expand broadband. We've gotten grants to actually do physical improvements to housing and neighborhood conditions, that kind of stuff. So it's not stuff that is, while you hope that you can continually get the resources, it's at least you have the resources to do it now. So it really is hard to turn it down. Whereas with Josh's and like the special events kinds of stuff, we don't have a lot of festivals, and so we rely on individuals who are building their capacity to do that. We'll support that and we'll work at that. We don't actually, maybe it's unfortunate, we don't look at long term, but having the event at least this time to see if it will go or not. And one of the good examples we do have is, so we have what we call almost Friday Fest, one time a month. And, you know, they were hoping like for 500 people. Now every month you can get 1,000+ people there, and they've expanded it to other than almost Fridays. But the thing that group is aware of is that they can't keep doing it, right? They can't do all of the festivals for everybody, but the leaders of that are willing to help other people who are interested in doing similar things learn the steps and learn from their mistakes and make the contacts. So, and again, all of those activities are supported by private sector interests. So Kent donates and Han donates and the hospitals involved. So it's different when you have to rely on public sector support to make those kinds of things happen. Whereas we're kind of providing in-kind stuff, not direct financial assistance.
Yeah. I know we have just about 5 minutes left. I do quickly want to touch on this audience question before we kind of move into just final takeaways with each of you. Perhaps I'll just pick on Jody for this one. The question is, how can city leaders encourage businesses to start in a small town?
So again, even that encouragement doesn't come from us individually. So we have a small business forgivable loan program. If you're going to create jobs or occupy a building that's otherwise sitting vacant, we will provide up to $25,000 that is forgivable, right? So it over time it goes away. But we don't do that even on our own. We partner with the chamber to evaluate the business plan, to evaluate the financial feasibility, and then as a committee we actually say this is the type of business and this is a business model that is both back to the sustainable part that Josh was talking about. It's sustainable over time and it meets our goals, right? So and oddly, even during COVID, we were giving out those grants. We were expending all of those funds to start new businesses with, you know, like a 2% failure rate over the 5 years of the loan. So those are the things that we do, but I think it's partnering with entities that have business development experience and knowledge to make sure that the businesses are helpful. Because sometimes, I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I've gotten applications and they're written like just written in pencil, like they're just made up numbers, and like even I get that this isn't gonna work. You have to go talk to the business center and come up with a plan. And going back to the very beginning of the conversation is giving the plan, putting it on paper. This is what I plan to do. This is why I plan to do it. I know there are other whatevers in the city, but this is why mine is different. So it's telling you what the plan is and selling the vision that the business center can help them write up and see what the barriers are, while we can provide some financial support to help that happen.
And we're almost at time, so I'll just go super rapid fire here, maybe like 20-30 seconds with each of you. Do you have any final takeaways and advice for communities, no matter your size, how to get a cool idea off the ground, whether it's something big like Coralville's Iowa River Landing or, public art, Muscatine? Just final takeaways here. Start with Nancy.
Well, I would say, I just in this conversation, one thing that really does strike me when we talk about sustainability is that, let's say you're successful with your project, you got it off the ground, then what? Are you going to do it forever? So you should be thinking about those things as you develop the project, about what does it look like for it to be successful, and sustaining it over the course of time. Who does it? How and the partners that are involved, because it is very true as far as setting boundaries about, or how many projects do you take on. In an organization like ours, I think it's actually easier to say no when you see some of the other projects not sustaining themselves if they're in that arena. So, but I would say, at the end of the day, the clear champion and making sure that you're really thinking it through, putting it on paper. There's a lot people can do in this community, and really any community, if you're committed to it and you're pulling your partners together and are willing to take your time. I think there's a lot of great ideas out there, and those are my hot takes.
I would say, you know, we're obviously in a horrible, it seems like just a defeating world right now. When you look at everything you look at, news, everything that's happening. But one of the best things about living where we live is that we are still small community, and you do have the ability to kind of move the needle and create some change and have your ideas moved forward. So whether that be through a city commission or a county commission seat or anything like that, getting involved with organizations like ours, you know, don't just say, ah, shucks, it's not going to get done. Let's get it done. So we're ready for you.
I think that collaboration is the key to getting anything done in smaller communities, and it's finding those partners on different projects is like the primary, the starting place, right? And if you're like, I have an idea, just keep calling until you find somebody who shares your idea. I mean, if you run through everybody in the virtual phone book now, then maybe it's not the right time, but typically there will be somebody else to talk through, and again, slowing down to get to the end line, you know, kind of back to the turtle in the hare.
As the Cedar Rapids Parks and Rec director likes to say, teamwork makes the dream work, I think is the theme of this panel here. All right, well, we are at time, but our next session in the community development track is answering a neighborhood's needs. So you're definitely welcome to stick around. That starts at 2:25. Thank you all for attending, and thank you again to our panelists for today's conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.